So today we're going to continue our journey that we're doing this month about developing our spiritual core. So I've been suggesting to you all month that part of our journey is really building. It's the build, it's the development, it's having the patience, the endurance, the flexibility, the strength to be able to build ourselves up. And so I've been making the kind of comparison between physical kind of development and spiritual development, so we can understand a little bit more. So when we think about what our core is, right, from a physical perspective, our core helps us to do many different functions in life. It helps us walk, it helps us to be able to have balance, stability, and when our core is weak, many other things are thrown off in our physical life. And our spiritual lives are very much the same. If we don't develop our spiritual core, if we don't consciously and intentionally develop that, then when we're caught in times when I'm tripping, right, the physical part, I'm tripping, my core is engaging and it's holding me steady. When we are tripping in life, we don't have that foundation, that structure, that deep inner core that is strong, that is able to deal with life's challenges. So we're exploring that here this month. What does it look like to deepen that reservoir of strength? How does it look to deepen that spiritual muscle? So we've talked about last week flexibility. The week before we talked about strength. And so this week I want to come back to strength a little bit, but in a different way. Because Andrew, as we said, the disciple Andrew is the disciple for the 12th power of strength, but it's about strength paired with faith. And so I want to explore that a little bit here today, because oftentimes we have a very toxic idea of what strength is. Our culture, our society, perhaps our families have indoctrinated us with this idea of strength that is not helpful to us sometimes. Many of us go through life carrying immense burdens. We feel like we have to do it all. If I don't do it, no one will. What will happen if I don't do X, Y, Z? I have to carry the burdens of my family. I have to carry the burdens of my friends. I have to carry the burdens of my spouse. Maybe a spouse is sick. Maybe a spouse is not completely where you would love them to be in their journey in life. And so you feel like that's yours to carry. Or maybe you're carrying something from the past. You're carrying some grievance, you're carrying some shame, you're carrying some guilt. And so we're trying to be strong. We're trying to hold it down. We're trying to hold it up. And so we are in this situation where we're overstating our strength. We're not allowing for spiritual strength, which is different, to move through us. And so when that happens, it results in oftentimes us being frustrated and sick and depressed and angry and resentful, and the whole laundry list goes on. So how do we move from this idea of a more inclusive and diversified way of understanding strength, a more strength that has ability to move, right? It's not this one thing. When we do that oftentimes too, when we're in that space, we pretend, don't we? And this is what I mean, is that we pretend sometimes when people ask us, what's wrong? I'm fine. I'm good. Everything's good. And then you're falling apart somewhere in another time in secret. Or maybe you feel like, I've been in this faith journey. I am, a child of God, and I don't inherit sickness, and you want to hold and cleave to that, and that's a wonderful thing. But sometimes we have to just allow ourselves to feel. Sometimes we have to allow ourselves to be human and have that human emotion. Sometimes we just have to allow ourselves to break down, to break through, as kind of the little cliche goes, right? But it's so true. It's part of this process. Think about, let's say, a weightlifter, or even more specifically, a deadlifter. A weightlifter, when they're carrying something, they're not holding it up. Y'all ever see, like in the Olympics, where they're heaving up the big weight? Are they holding it there forever? No, they usually hold it up and drop it. They're holding it up and dropping it. Maybe you're a weightlifter, you've done weights in your time. You're building muscle not just by holding it, you have to go through the full range. We're going through the full range of letting it go, letting it down. Our spiritual lives are very much the same. How many of you are trying to hold it all up? How many of you are trying to hold it up? Holding up the weight of the world. Oh my gosh, the war. Oh my gosh, this virus. Oh my gosh, all of this is happening in Tennessee. The politics, the policies, the LGBTQ, the race of this or that. How many of us are trying to hold it up? I invite you this morning to drop the weight. I invite you this morning to just let it go. And there's a way in which you're going to move through this morning. I want to turn this morning to Scripture. And I'm going to be in John, verse 11, if I don't trip. John, verse 11. And this is the death of Lazarus. Anyone remember that story? So we're going to take a little bit of a different approach. We could be on this story for days and go at it from many different angles. But I want to approach it from somewhat different space. So I'll tell you a little bit about what this story is about, and then we're going to kind of go through it little by little. So I think it's really important for us to kind of move through this together so that we fully understand the lesson that we have here for us. So Jesus has been out preaching, and he gets word that Lazarus is ill. Now, Lazarus is a very good friend of his. And Lazarus' sisters, Martha and Mary, appear. They all appear in other stories in the New Testament. And so we find out that he's ill. And he's told that, Lord, he whom you love is ill. And so then he says, this illness does not lead to death. Rather, it is for God's glory, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it. So they tell him that he's ill, but he makes the decision that he's going to wait before he goes to Lazarus. So he waits 2 days. Now, I would imagine, as we all do, sometimes when we hear of something, we want to jump in, right? We want to engage quickly. We want to solve. Who are like the amazing problem solvers who have to always jump in? Yep, that's me. I used to just always have to react quickly. I had to do something immediately. And then sometimes that's part of the strength that we're building. He says, no, I'm going to wait. In his wisdom and in his way of connecting to the truth of what's happening, he says, I'm going to wait. So he waits, and after 2 days, he tells his disciples, now I'm going to go to Judea. We can go now. And his disciples say, Rabbi, the Jews were just now trying to stone you, and you're going to go there again? So they're saying, there's fear there. And he says to them, no, I'm still going to go. This idea of the stones becomes important. And he says, these stones, these things that people are trying to hurt me with, these things that weigh us down will not keep me from being who I am and who I need to be. And so he goes. And he tells them as he's about to go, and in this journey, he says, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I'm going there to awaken him. And so the disciples said to him, Lord, if he has fallen asleep, he will be all right. And Jesus, however, had been speaking about his death, but they merely thought that he was referring to sleep. And then Jesus told them plainly, Lazarus is dead. For your sake, I am glad I was not there so that you may believe it. But let us go to him. And Thomas, who was called the twin, said to his fellow disciples, let us also go that we may die with him. So they go. When he gets there, Lazarus has already been dead for 4 days. He's been in the tomb. And so many greet him. And Martha says to him, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Now, I'm going to pause that for a second. How many times have we maybe in a situation where we're taking something on, or someone is giving us something to take on? If only you would have done X, Y, Z. If only you would have been there. If only you would have been the one to call mom. If you would have been only the one to be there with dad. There's often times that things are happening in our lives that people are trying to put something on us. Is that making sense? Yes. So here they're trying to put that on him. If you had only been here. And then he says, your brother will rise again. And he goes on to say, I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, will live, and everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? And so he goes on, and he encounters Mary, one of Lazarus' sisters, who he had a particularly close. He was close to the sisters and to the family. And she approaches him weeping. And she says to him, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who came with her also weeping, he was greatly disturbed in spirit and deeply moved. Now, I want to flag something here, because we're oftentimes told that Jesus is God, right? How many grew up where we're trying to say, just do the divinity of God? If that is it, that's the only plane that we are supposed to understand and Jesus is supposed to exist. Here's a beautiful way in which we see the humanity of Jesus. Jesus was not an automaton. I was asked this in class the other day, do you think Jesus would ever get mad? Absolutely. He's a human being. If this person that is in this text exists, and whether he does or doesn't, it's just a person, a character that reflects all of us. This happens. We become engaged in a story. We become emotional about something. And so here he becomes emotional. Now, do we know why? I don't know. We can venture to gauge. Maybe he's feeling like, did I make a mistake? Should I have been here? Is he letting the people that are putting this responsibility on him, is that the story he's buying into? I should have been here. I should have done it. I should have come sooner. Mea culpa, mea culpa, mea culpa. Or maybe he's frustrated and sad because he's saying, you all have been on this journey with me. Why is it me that has to do this all? It's overwhelming for me. I am overwhelmed. I can't do this all by myself. Has anyone been on those sides of the story? We don't know what's happening here, but again, this is a window for us. It's a story for us, a blueprint for us to experience our own humanity and our own divinity. So here he goes, and he's disturbed in spirit, and then he begins to weep. But then he says, take me to where he is. Take me to where Lazarus is. And then says, Jesus again, greatly disturbed, came to the tomb. So over and over again, we know there's emotion happening here. There's overwhelm, there's sadness, there's emotion, there's feeling. And he says, he comes to a cave, and a stone was lying against it. Jesus said, take away the stone. But then they said, well, how can we take away the stone? He's been there, yada, yada. And so he says, take away the stone. And so they moved the stone. And then he cried out loud, Lazarus, come out. Lazarus, come out. Lazarus, come out. And the dead man came out, his hands and feet bound with strips of cloth and his face wrapped in a cloth. Jesus said to him, unbind him and let him go. Where do we go with that story? What does that bring up for us? It's what I'm saying is oftentimes we are caught in this situation where we have the stones. They're real for us. The stones that we're carrying on top of us, it's like the weightlifter. We're carrying these stones around and we're trying to find this life, this spiritual development, this spiritual resurrection, but we have the stones that we're carrying. I went through a situation like that during the pandemic. I was right almost after the quarantine started in March of 2020. I became very ill. And I had absolutely no idea why I was having a lot of trouble breathing. My ribs were very irritated. And so at that time, those of you remember, if you didn't have COVID active, nobody was going to see you. No doctor was going to see you. And so I'm trying to figure this out on my own, doing all my home remedies, trying to move forward. Finally, they had different diagnoses as I talked to different doctors on the phone, and finally my doctor said, I just think you have COVID. Okay, nobody knew what COVID looked like at the time, how COVID was evolving, so, all right, I guess I have COVID. But then it didn't change, it was the same. And I believed that story for the longest time, and at the same time of believing that story, I'm trying to pastor to a spiritual community. I have people that need me, that were calling me for pastoral counseling, that I was doing counseling, pastoral counseling on Facebook and on different social media platforms, if you can believe that's the story of counseling, of pastoral counseling these days. But I was trying to hold it up. So when I was on Sunday, good morning, beautiful people, right? And I would go home and I was a mess, but I was trying to pretend that I wasn't, even to myself. Affirming, praying, meditating, doing everything that I could, but something wasn't right. Until one day I just said, I can't. And I broke down. Oftentimes that is what we need to be able to move to the next level. If you think about even fitness, you have to sort of go through those breakdowns of muscle, those breakdowns of just endurance or whatever it is. You have to break that down to sort of then move to the next level. Many of us are afraid. We're afraid to move to the next level. I get that. I thought to myself, Spirit, if I sit here and come to my knees and pray, I may never get up off this floor. And I believed that. So I stood up and I kept going until Spirit said, sit down, throw the stones down, lay the stones down. And so that's what happens. We are gifted with that. We are gifted with that opportunity, but we must be willing to let go of the fear and to step into that. The way Jesus said, no, this is a story, but I know the truth. I'm going to have my human emotions about this. I'm going to be upset. I'm going to weep. I'm going to be frustrated. But then I'm going to step into this cave and I'm going to say, come out. The stones will drop. This is our lives. The stones must drop. So let's take that into a time of meditation. I'm going to invite our musician back up here, David, to lead us. I'm going to invite you all to just close your outer eye so that your inner eye, that deep knowing, that deep connection can open. Take some beautiful, deep cleansing breaths. Get yourself comfortable. You are here immersed, deeply immersed in the Spirit. We allow for that Spirit to soar, to take over you right now. As you co-create this life, as you co-create this experience right here and right now, we breathe into that one presence and one power that is living and moving and breathing in us as us. We call upon that Christ consciousness. Come out. And I invite you to consider, what stones are you carrying? What stones of fear? What stones of worry? What stones of shame? What stones of guilt? What stones of sadness? What stones of insecurity? What stones of mistake? What stones of longing? What stones are you carrying today? What is causing you to not be able to come out from the cave and stand up as Lazarus did and release the bindings? Stand up. Come out. And so I invite you here in your time to allow to rest in the Spirit, in the silence, with the stones that are dropping. As we take a moment in the silence.